Some men fall apart when their world collapses. Me? I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in our house in Ann Arbor, Michigan, on a Tuesday morning in March 2020, and I made the strongest cup of coffee I'd ever brewed, because I needed something to hold on to, and my dignity wasn't cutting it anymore. My name is Clifford Page. I was 52 years old that morning, 28 years of marriage, 2 kids I'd walk through fire for, a house on Barton Shore Drive with a view of the Huron River that I'd spent 4 summers landscaping myself, and a wife, Sandra, who told me, while I was still in my bathrobe, that she was leaving me for Greg Hollis. Greg Hollis. My best friend since 1994. I remember thinking, at least she could have waited until I finished my coffee. Let me back up. Because the betrayal didn't start in March 2020. It started long before that, in the slow, quiet way all great disasters begin. Not with a bang, with a leak. A hairline crack you don't notice until the whole ceiling is on your lap. Sandra and I had met in the spring of 1992 at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti. I was studying business management. She was an education major. We were 24 and 22 respectively. She laughed at a joke I made in the cafeteria line. Something stupid about the mashed potatoes looking like drywall. And that was it. I was done for. We married in June 1993. I was 25. She was 23. I went into commercial real estate brokerage. Sandra taught 4th grade at Wines Elementary School in Ann Arbor for 17 years before transitioning into a curriculum consultant role for Ann Arbor Public Schools. We bought the house on Barton Shore Drive in 2001 when our daughter Renee was 6 years old. Troy was born in 1997, 4 years younger than his sister, and that house on Barton Shore Drive was the only home he'd ever known growing up. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. It was real. It was good. Greg Hollis came into our lives in 1994, 1 year after our wedding. He was my college roommate's cousin, and when he moved to Ann Arbor to open a landscape architecture firm, we folded him into our world without hesitation. That's what you do for family, and Greg felt like family. Friday night poker, Super Bowl parties. He was Troy's godfather, for crying out loud. His wife Deborah was a pharmacist at University of Michigan Health. She and Sandra were close. Not best friend close, but warm. They texted. They did the occasional girls' dinner. When Deborah and Greg separated in late 2018, Sandra was there for Deborah. Or so I thought. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Sandra was also there for Greg. The first sign I missed came in November 2019, 4 months before everything fell apart. Sandra started going to the gym in the evenings 3 times a week. Now, I'm not a suspicious man by nature. Sandra exercising was reasonable. She was 49. We were both in that season where the body starts sending notices you'd rather ignore. I said nothing. The second sign came in January 2020. Sandra started taking her phone to bed. She'd never done that before. We had a rule, phones on the charger in the hallway. She said she was using a sleep tracking app. I nodded. I believed her. Looking back, I want to shake myself. The third sign was Greg. He'd started coming around less. Fewer poker nights. Shorter texts. When I'd ask Sandra if she'd heard from him, she'd shrug and change the subject with the kind of fluid ease that, in hindsight, was practiced. Then came the Tuesday, March 10th, 2020. I had come home early from showing a commercial property on South State Street. The deal fell through. The client walked, and I just wanted to be home. I walked in at 2:30 in the afternoon. The house was quiet. Renee was at her apartment in Detroit. She'd been working at a marketing firm there since graduating from Michigan State in 2018. Troy was in his final semester at the University of Michigan. Sandra was at the kitchen table, phone face down, coffee going cold in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, and the expression on her face was not the face of a woman happy to see her husband home early. It was the face of a woman who'd been rehearsing something. Clifford. She said my full name. She only ever used my full name when she was about to deliver something I didn't want to hear. We need to talk. I put my keys on the counter. I sat down. Okay, I've been seeing Greg. The kitchen went very, very still. Seeing him how? She held my gaze. You know how. And I did. Of course I did. Some part of me had known for months and had chosen very deliberately not to look directly at the sun. I asked how long. 8 months, she said, since the previous July. I did the math. Instantly. They'd started while I was in Chicago at a real estate conference. While I was shaking hands and collecting business cards, my wife and my best friend were dismantling 28 years of my life. I didn't yell. That surprises people when I tell it. Everyone expects the broken dishes, the raised voice, the dramatic scene. Instead, I sat there in my bathrobe. I'd changed when I came in, with my hands flat on the kitchen table, very calm, and asked one more question. Is this over? Or are you choosing him? I'm choosing him, Cliff. Not Clifford. Cliff. Like we were already old friends talking about someone else's marriage. She moved out within the week. She went to Greg's rental house on Maiden Lane. He'd moved out of the house he'd shared with Deborah after their separation. I sat in our house on Barton Shore Drive and tried to remember how to breathe. I didn't know it yet, but the 2 phone calls I was about to make would change the entire trajectory of what came next. The first call was to my daughter Renee, that Friday night. She picked up on the second ring. Dad? What's wrong? Your mom left. She's been seeing Greg Hollis. The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then, oh, I am going to lose my mind. Renee? No, Dad, no. Greg? Greg? Troy's godfather? Dad, that man came to Troy's graduation dinner last May and sat across from you and smiled to your face. And, no, I'm coming home. She was at the house by Saturday afternoon. Troy drove over from campus that same evening. They sat on either side of me on the couch in the living room, and the 3 of us were quiet for a long time. Then Troy, who was 23, lanky and normally the quietest person in any room, said, So what are we going to do? Not what are you going to do. We. The 3 of us. I remember that word lodging in my chest like a warm coal. I don't know yet, I told him honestly, but I'm not falling apart. I refuse. Renee squeezed my hand. Good. Because we're not letting you. The second call was harder. I called Deborah Hollis on Sunday, March 15th, 2020. I owed her that. She answered, and I heard the wariness in her voice immediately, because she already knew Greg had moved on, but she didn't know with whom. Deborah, I'm sorry to be the one telling you this. Sandra and Greg have been together since July. I just found out. The sound she made was not a sob. It was quieter than that. More like someone being deflated. I had a feeling, she finally said. I just didn't know who. I didn't. God, Clifford, I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. We talked for 40 minutes. Deborah was a measured, intelligent woman, with a pharmacist's precision for facts, and a deep, quiet grief she wasn't going to show me completely. But she thanked me for calling. She said she would handle it with her attorney. She did not seem surprised that Greg had chosen someone attached to their shared social world. She said, quietly, he always needed an audience. I didn't know it yet, but that conversation with Deborah would surface again in a way I never expected. The divorce was finalized on October 7th, 2027, months after Sandra walked out. She didn't fight for the house. She wanted a clean break, she said. We split our retirement accounts and our savings down the middle. I kept the house. I kept the Huron River view. I kept the 4 years of landscaping work in the backyard. And I kept the silence that comes when a 28-year marriage is reduced to signatures on a settlement agreement. Sandra and Greg were still together. Still on Maiden Lane. Still, from everything I could see, deeply absorbed in the fantasy they'd built on the wreckage of 2 families. I was 52 years old, legally single for the first time since Bill Clinton's first term, and sitting in a 4-bedroom house alone on a cold October night in Ann Arbor, Michigan. There are moments in life when you realize you have an absolute choice. You can become the grief, or you can use the grief. I chose the latter. It didn't happen overnight, but it started that October. There's a particular kind of humiliation that nobody warns you about when a marriage ends. Not the legal kind, not the public kind, but the private kind. At 6 a.m., standing in your own kitchen making coffee for one, and realizing you've forgotten what you actually like for breakfast because you spent 28 years making what someone else wanted. That was November 2020. 8 months after Sandra left, the divorce had been finalized a month earlier. The house on Bartonshore Drive was mine. Fully, legally, completely mine. And I hadn't redecorated a single room. I was living in a museum of a marriage. Renee was the one who broke me out of it. She drove up from Detroit on a Saturday in early November, stood in the doorway of the living room, looked at the throw pillows Sandra had picked out, the curtains Sandra had hung, the family photos on the wall that still included the four of us, and she said, "Dad, we need to talk about something." She sat across from me at the kitchen table. Troy was on FaceTime on her phone, propped against the fruit bowl. "We've been thinking," Renee started. "We've been talking," Troy added from the screen. "About the business." I looked at them. "What business?" "The one you're going to start with us." I let out a short, tired laugh. "Renee, no, listen, we're serious." She slid a notepad across the table. On it, in her looping handwriting, were 4 words: residential staging and consulting. Now, some background. My 26 years in commercial real estate had given me an eye for properties. I understood space, presentation, value perception. But it was Troy who had the other piece of the puzzle. He had graduated from the University of Michigan in April 2020, right into a pandemic, with a degree in urban planning and a secondary concentration in interior design. He'd spent his final year doing a consulting project with a Detroit property developer, and his supervisor had told him he had a genuinely uncommon talent for spatial transformation. And Renee had spent 2 years at a marketing firm in Detroit. She understood branding, social media strategy, digital advertising, client acquisition. Between the 3 of us, we had real estate knowledge, design talent, and marketing capability. We call it Page & Co. Property consulting, Renee said. Residential staging, pre-sale consulting, and buyer preparation. Ann Arbor, Detroit Metro, and surrounding markets. The real estate market is moving fast. Dad, sellers need to move fast. A well-staged home sells for more and sells faster. You know this better than anyone. I looked at Troy on the screen. He was nodding, a little anxious, watching my face. I thought about the Monday morning I was going to wake up to if I said no. The quiet kitchen. The museum living room. The coffee for one. "When do we start?" I said. Renee's face broke into the widest smile I'd seen from her in months. "We already have a name. We already have a website domain. We just needed you." We incorporated Page & Co. Property Consulting LLC in Washtenaw County on December 3, 2020. I was 52 years old. Renee was 25. Troy had just turned 23. We used my study as the first office. Troy moved back into the house temporarily, back into his old room, which was not ideal for a young man's dignity, but he said he didn't care. Renee made the drive from Detroit every Monday and Friday. We set up a shared project management system, a professional website Troy designed in an all-nighter, and a simple Instagram page that Renee ran with the precision of someone who did this for a living, because she did. Our first client came through a referral from an old colleague of mine, a homeowner in Pittsfield Township, who was putting a 4-bedroom colonial on the market. We staged it using furniture sourced from 2 local consignment shops and Troy's talent for making a $200 armchair look like it belonged in a catalog. The house sold in 9 days for $22,000 over asking price. The client told her realtor we were responsible. The realtor called us the following week. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call from the realtor was the beginning of something that would grow well beyond what any of us had imagined. By March 2021, exactly 1 year after Sandra walked out, we had 31 completed projects and a waiting list of 12 clients. Renee had built us a social media following of nearly 4,000 people on Instagram, mostly through before and after content that Troy shot with a DSLR camera and edited on his laptop. Our average project fee was $3,200. We had grossed just over $95,000 in our first 3 months of real billing. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where Sandra told me she was choosing Greg, and looking at the numbers in our first quarterly report, and feeling something I hadn't felt in over a year: pride. Not everything was smooth. I'd be lying if I told you this was a clean, linear ascent. In February 2021, we lost a major contract, a 10-home new development deal with a builder in Saline, because the builder went with a larger staging company out of Southfield. It cost us roughly $40,000 in projected revenue. Troy didn't speak much for 2 days. Renee threw herself into redesigning our service packages. I took a drive out to the Nichols Arboretum and sat on a bench by the river for an hour and thought about quitting. I didn't quit. I drove home, called both of my kids, and told them we were expanding into virtual staging and buyer consultation, a newer service segment that allowed us to digitally transform listing photos for out-of-town buyers or remote sellers. Troy had the software skills. Renee had the marketing instincts. I had the real estate knowledge and the industry relationships. We launched the virtual service in April 2021. By summer, it was generating 30% of our revenue. Meanwhile, Sandra and Greg were getting on with their lives. I heard things through mutual acquaintances. Ann Arbor is not a large city, and social circles overlap like Venn diagrams drawn by someone who wasn't paying attention. Greg's landscape firm was struggling. The pandemic had cut into commercial clients, and he hadn't pivoted well to residential. Sandra had left her curriculum consulting role. I didn't know why, and I told myself I didn't need to know. Then, in September 2021, 18 months after she'd walked out, Sandra called me. I stared at her name on my phone screen for 4 full rings before I answered. Clifford. Still the full name. I heard you started a business with Renee and Troy. I did. It sounds like it's going well. It is. A pause. I'm glad. I really am. Another pause that had weight in it. Things are a little tight on our end. Greg's firm has taken some hits. I was wondering if you knew of any. Sandra. I kept my voice level. I'm not going to help you find work. I'm not going to help Greg find work. I genuinely wish you both no harm. But what you and I had is over. And I'm building something with our children now. That's where my energy goes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, I know. I just thought, take care of yourself. I hung up. Renee was standing in the doorway of the study. She'd heard the end of the call. She looked at me steadily. You okay? Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I really am. By the end of 2021, Page & Co. had grossed $380,000. We had moved out of the house study and into a proper office, a rented suite on Eisenhower Parkway in Ann Arbor. We had 2 part-time employees, a project coordinator and a junior designer Troy had recruited from the University of Michigan's Stamps School of Art and Design. We threw a small end-of-year dinner at a private room at the Chop House on South Main Street. Just the 3 of us, plus our 2 employees. We ordered good steak, we drank good wine, and Renee made a toast that I still hear in my head sometimes. To Dad, she said, glass raised. Who decided that being knocked down wasn't the same as being knocked out? Troy nodded. His jaw was tight the way it gets when he's trying not to get emotional in public. I looked at the 2 of them, my daughter at 26, my son at 24, and I thought, this is the part Sandra doesn't know about. This is the part she walked away from. I raised my glass. By January 2022, 2 years into building what had started on a kitchen table and a notepad, Page & Co., property consulting was not a side project anymore. It was a company. And companies, when they have the right people inside them, have a way of growing faster than their founders ever planned for. Let me tell you where we were at the start of year 3. Revenue in 2021 had closed at $380,000. By mid-2022, we were projecting to double that. We had expanded our service area from Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County into Oakland County, Wayne County, and the broader Southeast Michigan market. Troy had hired 2 additional junior designers and a photographer. Renee had brought on a full-time digital marketing coordinator and had begun developing a proprietary client intake system that cut our onboarding time by 40%. I had transitioned almost entirely out of hands-on staging work and into business development, leveraging my 2+ decades of commercial real estate relationships to bring in contracts most staging firms couldn't get near. We weren't just staging homes anymore. We were being hired by mid-size residential developers to pre-stage entire phases of new construction before they ever hit the market. In March 2022, we signed a contract with a Dexter-based residential developer 14 townhomes in a new community outside Ann Arbor for full pre-sale staging and marketing consultation. It was our single largest contract to date, worth $210,000. I was 54 years old, Renee was 27, Troy was 25. We were by any reasonable measure no longer struggling. The Sandra and Greg situation, meanwhile, had evolved the way bad foundations eventually do, with visible cracks. A colleague of mine who worked out of a shared office complex on Plymouth Road mentioned in passing, carefully, with the kind of discretion that suggests they knew it was sensitive, that Greg Hollis's landscape firm had quietly dissolved in early 2022. He'd let his staff go before Christmas. The commercial clients he'd relied on had not returned post-pandemic, and he hadn't built enough residential volume to compensate. Sandra, from what I understood, had returned to part-time substitute teaching in the Ann Arbor district. The woman who had been a full-time curriculum consultant for the city's public schools was now picking up substitute shifts. I did not feel triumph when I heard this. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something quieter, a recognition that choices have gravity, that building a new life on the wreckage of someone else's requires more structural integrity than most people calculate for in the beginning, when everything is still exciting and new and the future seems full of possibility. What they'd built together was not built to last, and it was showing. In June 2022, Troy came to me with an idea that changed everything. We were in the Eisenhower Parkway office, after hours, both of us with coffee going cold on the table. Troy slid a business plan across to me. Not a notepad, not a rough outline, but a proper 30-page document with financials, market analysis, and competitive positioning. I want to add a sister company, he said, interior design and renovation project management. Not staging, actual transformations, kitchens, bathrooms, open floor plan conversions. We have the clients, we have the relationships, and we have the credibility. Every single client we've ever staged for has asked us about renovation at some point. We've been referring them out to other companies and walking away from that revenue for 2 years. I read the plan. I asked him 6 hard questions. He had answers to all 6. What does Renee think? She drafted the marketing section. He pointed to page 19. I didn't know it yet, but this expansion would be the move that pushed us from a solid small business into a genuinely significant enterprise. We launched Page & Co. Design plus Build as a subsidiary in September 2022. We partnered with 2 licensed general contractors in the Ann Arbor-Detroit corridor and hired a project manager with 15 years of residential renovation experience. Our first renovation project, a complete kitchen and primary bathroom transformation for a client in Plymouth, came in under budget, finished on schedule, and generated before and after content that Renee turned into a marketing campaign that reached 200,000 people organically in the first 2 weeks. The phone didn't stop ringing for a month. Sandra and Greg got married in the fall of 2022. I didn't attend, obviously, and I wasn't invited, obviously. I heard about it from Troy, who heard about it from a mutual family acquaintance. They had a small ceremony. 20 people. A venue out near Whitmore Lake. Not the kind of wedding either of them probably imagined when the affair began. Not the triumphant beginning they'd planned. I heard this on a Thursday evening. I was in the office reviewing project budgets. I set my phone down. I thought about it for maybe 3 minutes. Then I went back to the budgets. 2022 closed at $810,000 in combined revenue across both entities. We had 14 employees. We had been featured in Our Detroit Magazine's annual home and design issue. Renee had been invited to speak on a panel at a Detroit real estate conference about digital marketing for home services businesses. Troy had been approached by a Michigan design publication to write a quarterly column. I was 54. My kids were 27 and 25. We were, by any honest accounting, doing extraordinarily well. I bought myself a new truck, a Ford F-150 in Oxford white, something I'd wanted for years and had always talked myself out of. I drove it home, parked it in the driveway of the house on Barton Shore Drive, and sat behind the wheel for a while looking at the river. I thought about the man who'd sat at that kitchen table in March 2020 in his bathrobe, making coffee for one. I barely recognized him. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you. In the spring of 2023, 3 years into the business, and 3 years after Sandra walked out, we crossed a threshold that I will never forget. On a Tuesday afternoon in April 2023, our accountant, a meticulous woman named Patricia, who operated out of a downtown Ann Arbor office on Washington Street, called me into a meeting and set a spreadsheet in front of me. Combined valuation of Page & Co., Property Consulting, and Page & Co. Design plus build, based on revenue multiples and asset assessment, $2.1 million. Renee was sitting next to me. She stared at the number for a long moment. Dad, she said quietly, I see it. We're millionaires. I looked across the table at Patricia, who was smiling with professional restraint. I looked at the spreadsheet again. The revenue lines, the margins, the asset column, the valuation figure at the bottom. I thought about the 14 employees who showed up every morning. The clients who sent us thank you notes when their homes sold. The before and after photos on Renee's Instagram page that had now accumulated over 90,000 followers. We are, I said. We really are. I need to tell you about Greg. In November 2023, 3.5 years after he had quietly helped destroy my marriage, Greg Hollis called me. I recognized the number. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. Cliff, it's Greg. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I get that. I heard about what you built with Renee and Troy. And I want you to know I think it's incredible. I'm proud of you, man. A pause. The kind of pause that precedes what the call is actually about. Things have been hard. My firm closed. I'm doing some freelance landscaping, but it's not enough. I was wondering if maybe Page & Co. had any need for someone with landscaping design on the consultation side. Exterior staging, curb appeal work, that kind of thing. I know it's a long shot, but I had to ask. I played the message twice. He had to ask. The man who spent 8 months carrying on an affair with my wife, who sat across from me at dinner tables while it was happening, who was Troy's godfather. He had to ask. I called him back. He picked up on the first ring. Cliff, Greg. I kept my voice even. Not cold. Just even. I listened to your message. I appreciate you saying what you said. And I'm going to be straight with you the way I wish you'd been straight with me. No. There's no place for you at my company. Not because I'm carrying bitterness. I'm genuinely not. Not anymore. But because the trust required to bring someone into what my children and I have built is something you forfeited a long time ago. I hope you find your footing. I mean that. I ended the call. I sat in the truck in the parking lot outside our Eisenhower Parkway office for a few minutes. Then I went back inside. There was work to do. By the end of 2023, we had closed the year at $1.8 million in combined revenue. We had 22 employees. We had expanded into Livingston County and were exploring a second physical office in Detroit's Midtown neighborhood, a market Renee had been studying for 2 years and believed was positioned for significant residential investment growth. In January 2024, Troy and I flew to a residential design conference in Chicago. We ate deep dish pizza at Lou Malnati's on Wells Street and walked along the Riverwalk in the cold because Troy said he wanted to feel the city. We talked about the business, about the future, about the Detroit office, about the possibility of a national licensing model for our staging methodology. We also talked about Sandra, not with anger that had burned off long ago, but with the particular honesty that comes between fathers and sons when enough time has passed. Are you happy, Dad? He asked. I thought about it genuinely before I answered. Yeah, I think I am. She doesn't know what she walked away from. She made her choice. I made mine. I think mine turned out better. Troy laughed, a real, full laugh that turned the heads of people walking past us on the Riverwalk. Yeah, he said. I think so too. I'm 55 years old as I share this with you. Sandra and Greg, from everything I've heard through people who still move in those circles, are not thriving. The marriage that began with betrayal has not proved to be the solid foundation either of them expected. Greg's financial instability has created pressure that romantic excitement is a poor substitute for. Sandra, from what I understand, is still substitute teaching. They sold the Maiden Lane house last year. It had become too expensive to maintain. My business is valued at over $3 million going into 2025. We have plans to open that Detroit office in the spring. Renee just hired a creative director, a genuinely talented young woman from Corktown. And Troy is finalizing a design partnership with a sustainable materials supplier that could change the way we approach renovation projects. I still live in the house on Barton Shore Drive. I refinished the kitchen last fall. Troy designed it, I project managed it, and it is spectacular. The Huron River still sits at the bottom of the yard. The landscaping I put in over 4 summers is mature now, settled into the property like it was always supposed to be there. I am not a man without scars. I won't pretend the marriage ending didn't cost me something real. It did. 28 years of shared life doesn't dissolve without leaving marks. But scars are not wounds. They're evidence that something happened, and that you survived it. If you're somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, if someone you trusted broke something that felt irreplaceable, I want you to hear this. You don't have to become someone new. You just have to find who you already were underneath all the layers of accommodation and habit and shrinking yourself to fit a space that wasn't big enough for you anymore. My daughter and my son didn't give me a business plan because they felt sorry for me. They gave it to me because they believed in me. They had always believed in me. I had just been too busy maintaining someone else's comfort to notice. The greatest thing Sandra and Greg gave me, unintentionally at great cost to everyone involved, was a reason to find out what I was actually made of. Turns out I was made of more than I knew. We're now millionaires. And there, well, you heard. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this.